The road turned to dirt, then to almost nothing, and then the town appeared. A place that wasn't on any map, filled with people who stopped everything they were doing just to stare. No waves, no smiles, no birds, no wind, just silence and eyes. By the time he noticed the one clean vehicle in a town covered in dust, a dark pickup truck sitting and running beside the store, it was already too late to pretend nothing was wrong. What happened next on that road in the middle of nowhere is something he will never be able to explain. About 12 years ago, when I was 21, I thought I had my entire future figured out. Not because I was smart, not because I had a great job, and definitely not because I had money. I thought I had it figured out because I believed I was going to build the biggest farm channel on the internet. Looking back now, that sounds ridiculous. But back then, I was obsessed. Every spare second of my life revolved around cameras, editing software, and uploading videos that barely anyone watched. Most people my age were in college. Others were working full-time jobs. I was driving around rural counties filming abandoned farms, livestock auctions, and anything else I thought might go viral. The problem was that nobody cared, at least not yet. My videos struggled to get views. Most uploads barely crossed a few hundred, but every once in a while one would perform slightly better than expected, and those small wins kept me going. The dream was simple: keep uploading, keep improving, and someday turn it into a career. The opportunity that changed everything arrived during the fall of 2014. A regional agricultural expo was holding a content competition. The winner would receive $5,000 worth of camera equipment and a chance to work with several major farming publications. For someone like me, it felt huge. Winning could completely change my future. The event was being held nearly 6 hours away from where I lived. That meant a long drive through some of the most isolated farmland in the state. Still, I didn't hesitate. I packed my camera gear, charged every battery I owned, and left before sunrise. At first, everything went smoothly. The weather was clear. Traffic was light, the roads were empty, exactly how I liked them. For the first few hours I made great time. Then my GPS stopped working. At first, I didn't panic. Technology failed all the time back then. I figured it would reconnect eventually. It didn't. Instead, the screen froze completely. A few minutes later it shut itself off and refused to turn back on. That was annoying, but not a disaster. I still had printed directions, or at least I thought I did. When I reached for them, I discovered something that immediately made my stomach sink. I'd left them on my kitchen table. Losing my directions wasn't the scary part. The scary part was where I ended up after trying to guess my way through the countryside. For nearly an hour, I drove through roads I'd never seen before. The farther I traveled, the fewer signs I encountered. Eventually, even the paved roads disappeared. The asphalt became gravel, then dirt, then something that barely qualified as a road at all. Cornfields stretched endlessly in every direction. There were no businesses, no houses, no gas stations, nothing, just farmland. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course, the battery was already below 20%. Perfect. I remember laughing to myself, not because anything was funny, but because this kind of thing always seemed to happen to me. Eventually, I spotted a cluster of old buildings ahead. Calling it a town would be generous. There couldn't have been more than a dozen structures. Most looked abandoned. Several windows were boarded up. The paint on nearly every building had peeled away years ago. The entire place looked forgotten, as if the rest of the world had simply moved on without it. I slowed down as I entered. A few people stood outside what appeared to be an old general store. Every single one of them stopped what they were doing and watched my truck pass. None of them waved. None of them smiled. They just stared. Something about that bothered me. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way nobody seemed surprised to see a stranger. Or maybe it was because every single person looked nervous, as though they were waiting for something bad to happen. And then I noticed something even stranger. Every vehicle in town was covered in dust, except one. A dark pickup truck parked beside the store. Its engine was running, and someone was sitting inside, watching me. At that moment, I still thought being lost was my biggest problem. I had no idea that within the next few hours, I would find myself trapped on a farm where people vanished after dark. I pulled into the store parking lot hoping to ask for directions. The second I stepped out of my truck, I noticed how quiet everything was. No birds, no insects, no wind, nothing. The silence felt unnatural, like the entire town was holding its breath. Inside the store, an elderly man stood behind the register. He looked to be at least 70. His eyes immediately shifted toward the window behind me, toward my truck, toward the road, then back to me. "You lost?" he asked. I nodded. "Trying to get to Riverside County Fairgrounds." The man's expression changed instantly, not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. He looked concerned, very concerned. Before he could answer, the front door opened behind me. The bell above it jingled softly. Every person inside the store turned toward the entrance, and suddenly nobody was speaking anymore. The room had gone completely silent. I turned around. A tall man wearing muddy work clothes had entered. The strange part wasn't the man. It was the reaction everyone else had to him. People avoided eye contact. The cashier looked down. Even the customers moved away from him. The newcomer slowly looked around the store. Then his eyes locked onto me, a complete stranger, and he smiled. Years later, I would learn exactly who that man was and why everyone in town seemed terrified of him. But at that moment, standing inside that tiny store, there was only one thing I knew for certain. The second he smiled at me, I got the overwhelming feeling that I should leave immediately. I left the store a few minutes later. The entire interaction bothered me, especially the man who had smiled at me. There was nothing friendly about it. It felt like the kind of smile someone gives when they already know something you don't. Still, I convinced myself I was overthinking it. I had a long drive ahead of me, a competition to attend, and bigger things to worry about. The old cashier's direction seemed simple enough. Stay on the same road, pass several miles of farmland, eventually reach a county highway that would take me to the expo. Easy. At least that's what I thought. As I drove farther away from town, the scenery became more isolated. The farms slowly disappeared. The houses became less frequent. Soon there was nothing except endless woods and open fields. The sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky. Orange lights stretched across the horizon. I checked my phone. Still no signal. Not surprising. I switched on the radio. Nothing but static. The silence was starting to get uncomfortable. To distract myself, I began practicing the speech I planned to give if I somehow won the competition. I know that sounds ridiculous, but when you're chasing a dream, you spend a lot of time imagining success. It helps you ignore reality. For a while, it worked. Then something happened. A white pickup truck suddenly appeared behind me. I recognized it immediately. It was the same truck I'd seen parked outside the store, the same dusty truck, the same truck that had been running when I arrived. At first, I didn't think much about it. Maybe it was heading in the same direction. Maybe I was being paranoid. Then the truck accelerated, fast. It passed me aggressively. The driver never looked over, never waved, never acknowledged me. The truck disappeared around a bend and was gone. I remember feeling relieved. I shouldn't have. About 40 minutes later, I discovered the reason that truck had been in such a hurry, and it made my blood run cold. By then, darkness was beginning to settle over the countryside. The trees seemed taller, the road seemed narrower. Every mile felt more isolated than the last. That's when I heard a loud metallic crack beneath my truck. The steering wheel jerked violently. My heart nearly stopped. I fought to keep control. The vehicle swerved across the road before finally sliding onto the shoulder. Everything went silent. For a few seconds, I just sat there breathing heavily. Then I climbed out. The damage was worse than I expected. Both front tires were destroyed, not flat, destroyed. When I crouched down with my flashlight, I saw something sticking out of the rubber. Nails, several of them. Large, rusted nails. My stomach tightened. That didn't make any sense. How does someone hit that many nails at once? I scanned the road behind me. Nothing, just darkness. No houses, no vehicles, no signs of anyone. I pulled out my phone. 1 bar of service appeared, then disappeared, then returned. I quickly called my friend Ethan. The call barely connected. I explained where I'd been. The strange town, the gas station, the road, the damaged tires. Ethan promised he'd try locating me on a map. Then the call dropped. I never got the chance to call him back. At that point, being stranded was still my biggest concern. Then I noticed something in the woods. Something standing perfectly still between the trees. Night arrived faster than I expected. The temperature dropped sharply. I decided to stay inside the truck. Walking through unfamiliar woods after dark sounded like a terrible idea. So I waited, and waited, and waited. Eventually, boredom gave way to uneasiness. I couldn't shake the feeling that somebody was watching me. Every few minutes I'd look into the trees. Nothing, just darkness. Then I saw it. A shape, tall, motionless, standing near the edge of the woods. At first I thought it was a tree stump, but then it moved, only slightly, just enough. My heart immediately started racing. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the figure. The moment the beam hit the trees, nothing was there. The figure had vanished. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, my imagination. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. Someone had been standing there, watching, the same way the people in town had watched me, the same way the man in the store had smiled at me. Then something appeared in the distance. Headlights, 2 bright beams cutting through the darkness, approaching slowly. Relief flooded through me. Finally, help. Or at least, that's what I thought. As the vehicle got closer, I realized something. The approaching vehicle wasn't a tow truck. It wasn't a police car. And it definitely wasn't a random traveler. Because, as the headlights illuminated the road, I recognized the white pickup truck. The same one from town. The same one that had sped past me earlier. And this time, it wasn't driving past. The truck slowed down, then stopped directly beside my disabled vehicle. The engine continued idling, but nobody got out. For nearly 30 seconds, the driver's door remained closed. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Then slowly, the door opened, and the man who stepped out was the same man who had smiled at me inside the store. The moment I recognized the man, every alarm bell in my head started going off. He wasn't smiling anymore. In fact, his expression looked completely different from what I'd seen inside the store. His face was blank, almost emotionless, like he wasn't looking at a person, like he was looking at an object. I quickly locked my doors and reached for my phone. No signal, nothing. The man continued standing beside my truck, not moving, just staring. Then another pair of headlights appeared farther down the road. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe another driver had finally arrived. Maybe somebody normal. Maybe somebody who could help. I couldn't have been more wrong. The second vehicle slowed down, then stopped directly in front of my truck. My stomach dropped. I was trapped. 1 vehicle behind me, 1 vehicle in front of me, and nothing but farmland and woods surrounding both sides of the road. What happened next made me realize this wasn't a random encounter. These people had been expecting me. The driver's door of the white pickup swung open. 2 more men climbed out, both wearing muddy farm clothes. Neither said a word. The 3 men slowly approached my truck. 1 moved toward the passenger side. 1 remained near the front. The man from the store walked straight toward my door. I rolled the window down slightly, just enough to speak. "What do you want?" I asked. No answer. The man simply stared at me, then he reached into his pocket. For a split second I thought he had a weapon. Instead, He pulled out a folded photograph and pressed it against my window. I looked down. The blood drained from my face. It was a picture of me, standing beside my truck earlier that afternoon. The photo had clearly been taken in town, without my knowledge, without my permission. My hands immediately started shaking. How long had they been watching me? The man slowly tapped the photograph against the glass, once, twice, then pointed toward the dark fields behind him, as if he wanted me to follow him. I shook my head. The man's blank expression never changed, but the people standing behind him suddenly began moving closer. Then I noticed something far more terrifying than the men themselves. There were more people standing in the field, a lot more. At first I thought they were fence posts, shadows, anything else, but they weren't. Several figures stood motionless among the rows of crops, watching, not moving, not speaking, just staring. My heart began pounding. There weren't 3 people out here. There were dozens, and somehow none of them had made a sound. The realization hit me all at once. This wasn't random. This wasn't road rage. And it definitely wasn't somebody trying to help a stranded driver. Something was very wrong. Very, very wrong. The man beside my door suddenly grabbed the handle. Hard. The truck shook. Another man moved to the passenger side and did the same. The handles rattled violently. Metal groaned. My truck rocked back and forth. I yelled at them to stop. Nothing. No response. No reaction. It was like they couldn't even hear me. Then the man beside my door stopped pulling. For several seconds he simply stared at me, completely silent. Then he opened his mouth and unleashed a scream. Not a shout, not a yell. A full-throated animal-like scream that echoed across the fields. The sound nearly froze me in place, and almost immediately, more screams answered from the darkness. That was the moment I realized there were far more people hiding out there than I could see, and every single one of them now knew exactly where I was. Panic took over, pure instinct. I threw my shoulder against the driver's door and shoved it open with all my strength. The man stumbled backward. I didn't wait. I ran. The cold air burned my lungs as I sprinted toward the woods. Branches whipped across my face. Mud splashed beneath my shoes. Behind me I could hear shouting, footsteps, people crashing through the brush. But then an idea hit me. Instead of continuing deeper into the woods, I dove behind a fallen tree only a short distance from the road. I pressed myself flat against the ground, trying not to breathe, trying not to move. Moments later, several figures ran past me. They were moving fast, much faster than I expected, and they kept going deeper into the forest, exactly where they thought I'd gone. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Finally, the sounds faded. I slowly stood up, then ran back toward the road. My truck was still there. The doors hung open. The headlights remained on. Shockingly, my backpack was untouched. My camera equipment was untouched. Even my phone was still inside. I grabbed everything and started running. Not toward the woods, not toward the fields. Straight down the road, as fast as I possibly could, because deep down, I knew something terrifying. Those people didn't want my truck. They didn't want my equipment. And they definitely didn't want my money. They wanted me, and I still had no idea why. I ran for what felt like forever. In reality, it was probably less than 30 minutes. Eventually, I saw headlights approaching from the distance. For a second, I froze. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if I could trust anyone. The vehicle slowed down. A middle-aged woman rolled down her window. The second she saw me, she knew something was wrong. I must have looked completely terrified, covered in dirt, out of breath, barely able to form a sentence. Thankfully, she let me sit inside her car while she contacted emergency services. I explained everything: the town, the strange people, the photographs, the trucks, the men in the fields, everything. When deputies eventually arrived, they listened politely, but I could already tell they didn't fully believe me. A few officers searched the area. Others inspected my truck. Unfortunately, there wasn't much evidence. The photographs were gone. The trucks were gone. The people were gone. It was as if they had never existed. The only things officers found were a few dents on my truck and the destroyed tires. Nothing that proved what I had experienced. The investigation didn't go anywhere. A few days later, I returned home. I never attended the competition, never won the prize. And honestly, I stopped caring. Because for weeks afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about that town, those people, and the photographs. I thought the nightmare was over. Then, 3 months later, something arrived in my mailbox. Something that should have been impossible. It was a plain envelope. No return address, no stamp, nothing. Somehow it had simply appeared. Inside was a single photograph. My hands started shaking the moment I saw it. The picture showed my house, taken from across the street. Recently. Very recently. On the back of the photo, someone had written 3 words. "We found you." I immediately contacted the police. Again. But there was no way to trace where the photograph came from. No fingerprints, no useful evidence, nothing. For months, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me jump. Every unfamiliar vehicle made me nervous. Every stranger seemed suspicious. Thankfully, nothing else happened, at least not for a long time. Years passed. Eventually, life moved forward. The fear faded, but it never completely disappeared. Then something happened that brought everything rushing back. Nearly 6 years later, I met someone who had actually heard of that town, and what he told me still keeps me awake at night. The conversation happened by pure coincidence. I was filming at a county livestock event. An older rancher noticed the location mentioned in one of my stories. The second I mentioned the town's name, his expression changed. Immediately. Just like the old cashier's expression had changed all those years ago. I asked him if he knew the place. He nodded, slowly. Then he asked me a question. "Did they take your picture?" The blood drained from my face. I hadn't told him about the photographs. Not yet. I asked how he knew. The rancher stared at me for several seconds before answering. Then he told me something I wish I'd never heard. According to local rumors, strange disappearances had happened around that area for decades. Travelers, hunters, truck drivers, people passing through. Nobody knew exactly who was responsible, but the stories always shared one detail. Before someone vanished, photographs of them would appear. Sometimes days before, sometimes weeks before, as if they had been selected, chosen, watched. The rancher told me he personally knew 2 people who disappeared near those roads. Neither was ever found. Neither case was solved, and both had reportedly been seen in that same town shortly before vanishing. To this day, I don't know if those stories were true. Maybe they were rumors. Maybe they were exaggerations. Maybe the old rancher was simply trying to scare me. I honestly don't know. What I do know is this. I never drove through that area again. I never went looking for answers. And I never wanted to. Because every now and then, usually late at night, I still think about the photograph that arrived in my mailbox. And I wonder something that terrifies me. If those people really were watching me, how do I know they ever stopped? Thanks for listening my story.